This story can be described in many ways: a theater of the absurd, a tangled plot of a love drama, or the script of a senseless crime. Rivalry over a man rarely leads to anything good. This is exactly what the participants in this story eventually realized when their lives changed overnight, and for some, simply ended absurdly. And before we get started, be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and stay active. It will help a lot. I will be very grateful to you for that. Let's get started. Emilia Carr was born on August 4th, 1984. She grew up in the city of McIntosh, Florida, where she lived with her parents, two older brothers, and younger sister. Emilia had far from an ideal childhood. From an early age, the girl was subjected to abuse by her own father and grandfather, the very people who were supposed to protect her and ensure her safety. When the authorities learned about the investigation involving minors, all four children were removed from the family. Emilia's father was arrested and held accountable. The man was ordered to complete a court-mandated program. For some reason, he was not sent to prison, as they believed he would reform after the program. But then, the children were returned to the family where they were abused, and everything resumed. This went on throughout Emilia's childhood and teenage years. The authorities turned a blind eye, believing her father had changed. Worst of all, the girl's mother also ignored what was happening, even though she clearly saw how her daughter suffered. She knew but did nothing. Emilia described the horror she felt almost every night when she went to bed. As soon as she heard the creak of floorboards outside her room, she knew her father or grandfather would abuse her again. At school, Emilia pretended everything was fine at home. She focused on her studies to achieve something in life and truly excelled. Her IQ was 125. Emilia was an excellent student and believed a good education would help her change her situation. When she turned 15, the abuse was still ongoing. But now Emilia began to fear for her younger sister, Malagra, who was 13 at the time. She suspected that Malagra was also being abused. The sisters were incredibly close. The younger girl was born with several congenital defects, and Emilia felt obligated to protect her. But what could a schoolgirl do against two grown men? The girl went to the school administrator and told them everything that was happening at home. As soon as the teachers learned about the abuse in the family, her father was immediately arrested. This time, he was actually charged and was set to appear in court. Emilia, her mother, and maternal grandmother were ready to testify in court. Instead of admitting guilt and trying to fix the situation, Emilia's father decided to take action. He wasn't going to spend time in prison and hired a hitman to get rid of his wife, mother-in-law, and eldest daughter all at once. But apparently, he was in such a hurry to deal with his family that he approached the wrong person. It turned out the hitman he hired was an undercover police officer. Despite the fact that Emilia's father had abused his eldest daughter for 10 years, possibly molested the younger one, and then hired a hitman to eliminate his family members, he was sentenced to only 4 years in prison. However, this time was enough for Emilia to get back on her feet and breathe freely. She was finally able to escape the abuse and protect her younger sister from it. For the first time in her life, things were going well for the girl. She became passionate about photography, started working in modeling, and enlisted in the military. Unfortunately, her difficult childhood left a mark on Emilia, as she had endured too much. On one hand, she felt guilty for sending her own father to prison. On the other, she was incredibly angry at her mother for allowing her husband to abuse the children, for not intervening or protecting them. The girl was torn by conflicting emotions and had to cope with them somehow. Eventually, Emilia left her mother's home and lived in various foster families. Then she dropped out of school and, at 17, became pregnant. The father of the child was a man much older than her. To avoid legal trouble for him, Emilia married him. The marriage was doomed from the start, and the couple soon divorced. After that, the young woman changed partners like gloves, constantly entering relationships that weren't right for her. As a result, she had 2 more children with 2 different men. Then, Emilia periodically got involved in criminal activities. She even had a conviction for helping her ex-husband steal exotic birds. By the age of 21, Amelia was a single mother with 3 children. She realized she was on the wrong path and decided to turn her life around, to settle down somehow. So she earned her high school diploma, trained as a massage therapist, and began earning a decent living. It was at this stage of her life that Amelia met a couple who played a significant role in this story: Joshua Fulgham and Heather Strong. They were about 3 years older than Amelia and had been in a relationship for quite a long time. Their romance began back in high school. Joshua Fulgham was born on August 16, 1981 in Mississippi, and like Amelia, he had a very troubled childhood. When the boy was about 7, his mother brought home a new partner who constantly beat Josh. The boy was always covered in bruises and suffered several head injuries, which caused him to repeat grades multiple times before being expelled from school altogether. The closest person to Joshua was his grandmother. She understood him like no one else, and did everything she could to ease her grandson's suffering. Unfortunately, when Fulgham was a teenager, his grandmother passed away. The boy was left alone with his problems. This was the final straw for him. After the elderly woman's funeral, Josh's life seemed to spiral completely out of control. He turned to alcohol and illegal drugs to cope with the situation and eventually became a criminal. Fulgham committed arson and burglaries, and one day he was caught. At 16, Josh ended up in juvenile detention centers multiple times. Once, after being released, he met a girl named Heather Strong. Heather was his age, but very kind and gentle. Her face always lit up with a smile. She knew how to offer support and care. At the time, 16-year-old Heather worked as a waitress. When they met at a cafe, the young people instantly felt drawn to each other. It was their first teenage love. When a family member attacked Heather at home, Josh and his mother opened their home to her. That's how the couple began living together. At 18, Heather became pregnant with Josh's child, and their first son was born. The young father settled down and got a job in trailer construction and installation. They could now afford to move out and live on their own. It seemed a bright future awaited them. However, soon, Joshua fell back into using illegal substances, and his life went downhill. His entire world turned into chaos. He lost his job. Their means of survival ran out quickly. To fund his destructive addiction, Fulgham turned to selling illegal drugs, and since that money wasn't enough, he decided to produce psychoactive substances himself. His drug addiction completely changed Josh's personality, turning him into an angry, volatile, and highly aggressive person. Soon, he began physically abusing Heather, seeing other women behind her back, and acting erratically. The young woman didn't want her child to grow up in constant fear. She packed her things and moved with the baby to her grandmother's house. This happened repeatedly. Heather would leave, Josh would pull himself together, clean up the house, and go retrieve the mother of his child. He would beg her on his knees to return to him, assuring her he was done with drugs and that things would be different from now on. But people rarely change. As soon as Heather believed him and returned, the cycle would repeat after some time. It was during this period, when the couple was constantly breaking up and getting back together, that Heather became pregnant again. They decided their life was too unstable to have another child. So when Heather gave birth, the couple decided it would be best for the baby to be given up for adoption, which is what happened. This difficult decision became a point of no return for Josh. He finally realized he needed to get his act together, or one day he would lose everything he had. In 2003, 21-year-old Heather and Josh tried to start over. They moved from Mississippi to Marion County, Florida, where Josh's other grandmother lived, who helped them get back on their feet. Everything was going well until the couple met a young woman named Emilia Carr, and then everything went downhill again, especially for Heather. At the time, Amelia was dating a man named Jamie Akeem. They had been friends since school, and he was also the father of one of her children. Their relationship was complicated, with the young couple constantly breaking up and getting back together. When Josh and Heather moved to Florida, the two couples met and started spending a lot of time together. Soon after the move, Heather became pregnant again. This was her third child. Unfortunately, instead of becoming a loving and caring father, Josh relapsed and returned to his destructive habits. He became excessively aggressive. Fulgham was angered that Heather, due to her pregnancy, refused intimacy, and he began cheating on her again. Somehow, Amelia and Josh went from being friends to lovers. A mutual friend of theirs died in a car accident. They were completely devastated by the news. To console each other, they couldn't think of anything better than to sleep together. From that moment, their affair began. At the time, Emilia and Jamie Akeem were on a break, so Carr's boyfriend had no idea, and the lovers met almost every day. But pregnant Heather had no clue their relationship was more than just friendship. When Strong gave birth, all the childcare responsibilities fell on her shoulders. Josh found it far more entertaining to spend time with Amelia than to care for the baby. This affair lasted nearly a year when Heather finally discovered that her beloved and Emilia, who called herself a friend, were secretly involved. She was utterly devastated. The woman packed her things, took the children, and returned to Mississippi. As the saying goes, you don't value what you have until it's gone. That's exactly how Joshua felt when he realized he had lost his partner yet again. Only then did he realize that he truly needed only Heather. Emilia Carr was just a way to satisfy his male needs. Joshua was never in love with her. Fulgham simply thought the grass was always greener on the other side. After thinking it over, he ended things with Amelia and, 2 weeks later, went to Mississippi to win back his beloved. He swore up and down that he would never look at another woman, that he couldn't be happy without Heather, and that he would carry her in his arms and do everything to make her and the children happy. The woman melted again and believed Josh. This marked the beginning of an endless, tangled love triangle. Heather and Josh lived in Mississippi for a while. 5 months passed since their reunion, and everything was wonderful until they decided to return to Florida. Although Josh loved Heather, there was something about Emilia Carr that wouldn't let him go. Unfortunately, moving back to Marion County brought everything back to square one. Fulgham almost immediately started drinking and using illegal substances again, becoming aggressive once more. His behavior led to constant arguments and family disputes. After yet another breakup, Josh ran back to Amelia and found solace in his mistress's bed. However, this situation didn't sit well with Heather, and now she wanted to bring Fulgham back into the family. This went on for months. Josh would leave one woman for the other, then return, until all the players in this romance finally entered a polyamorous relationship. Polyamorous relationships are an ethical view of love that allows one person to have romantic relationships with multiple people simultaneously with their consent. There were even rumors that Heather and Amelia were also in a relationship with each other. But in the end, each woman dreamed of being the only one for Josh. Neither was satisfied with the arrangement. Both tolerated the situation out of fear of losing the man they loved. By June 2008, Heather had had enough. She turned 26 and didn't want to spend her entire life competing for Josh's heart. She decided to break up, this time for good. Previously, Heather had worked part-time as a nanny. She looked after the children of a single man named Ben. After breaking up with Fulgham, she quickly started a romance with Ben. Their children were about the same age. Heather liked Ben's calm demeanor. At first, they were just friends. But after the woman ended things with Josh, their relationship turned romantic. Finally, Heather could enjoy life, coming home to someone who was waiting for her, who treated her with deep respect. Their children got along quickly, and everything would have been fine if not for one problem. That problem was Josh. It turned out the man wasn't going to let Heather be happy without him. At first, he couldn't believe she would actually leave him and start living her own life. But when he realized it, He became literally obsessed with Heather and Ben's relationship. Josh began stalking them both, driving by Ben's house at night, waiting for them on the street, and even threatening violence if they didn't break up. One day, he broke into Ben's house armed with a gun, demanding they end their relationship. Meanwhile, Josh was still living with Amelia, who didn't seem to care that her boyfriend was obsessed with his ex, or she was willing to tolerate Fulgham's behavior as long as he stayed with her. November 2008 arrived, and Heather and Ben had been in a serious, stable relationship for about 5 months. Everything was wonderful. They were both happy. Joshua and Amelia were also living together. That summer, Carr became pregnant, and in November, when she was about 4 months along, Fulgham proposed to her. The news of the engagement quickly reached Heather Strong, and her good mood vanished. She had borne Josh 3 children, stood by him through the toughest times, endured his unbearable behavior, and yet another woman received the proposal. This fact deeply hurt Heather. It pained her. Nevertheless, she began reevaluating her relationship with Ben and concluded that she was still in love with Joshua. After telling Ben she wanted to end things, Heather called Fulgham and said she wanted to reconcile. Naturally, between Carr and Strong, Josh always chose the latter. He immediately broke things off with the pregnant Amelia and asked her to return the engagement ring. A few days later, Fulgham proposed to Heather with the same ring. A month later, the newlyweds registered their marriage, officially exchanging vows. 10 minutes after the ceremony, Josh called Amelia for a friendly chat, and that was just the beginning. Within days of the wedding, the young couple began arguing. There was no honeymoon period. Things were so bad that a week and a half after the wedding, Josh pointed a shotgun at Heather's face and threatened to shoot her. The woman, terrified, called the police. Josh was arrested. He was charged with assault with a firearm under aggravating circumstances. He was sent to jail to await trial. At that moment, Heather sold her engagement ring, and while Josh was in jail, began dating a man named Jamie Akeem. He had appeared earlier in the story. Jamie was Emilia Carr's ex-boyfriend and the father of one of her children. He was also Fulgham's best friend when he and Heather first moved to Florida. They hung out as couples and often spent time together as a group of 4. During this time, Amelia visited Josh in jail. The man was furious at Heather for putting him behind bars, even though he was the one who threatened to shoot her with a shotgun. Fulgham was convinced his wife had deliberately set him up to ruin his life. Now he and Carr were together again, and Josh constantly vented his grievances about Heather to her. Wanting to be the only one, Amelia egged him on even more. Deep down, she wanted her rival gone from their lives forever. In Amelia's view, the only way to stay with Josh was to get rid of Heather Strong. Carr kept saying that if Heather wanted, Josh would lose his children. Something had to be done about it. Fulgham was already on edge in jail, and Amelia kept pressing his sore spots. At some point, it worked. Josh no longer wanted Heather. Now he wanted to be with Amelia alone. But he was in jail awaiting trial, and something needed to be done to make Heather drop the charges. The wildest part of this whole situation was that Carr and Strong were still on good terms. They weren't best friends, but they communicated normally. Amelia sometimes looked after Heather's children when she needed to step out, but she didn't know that Strong was dating one of her ex-boyfriends. Amelia would come to Heather's house and try to convince her to drop the charges against Josh. She tried to stay calm until she learned that Heather was dating Jamie Akeem, the father of one of her children. At that moment, everything changed because Amelia lost her temper. She grabbed a knife, held it to Heather's throat, and demanded that the woman drop the charges. Eventually, Amelia calmed down and pulled herself together. But at that moment, she harbored a serious grudge against her rival. Considering she herself was sleeping with Strong's husband, Amelia had no moral right to make any demands of Heather. Carr began going to all her acquaintances, friends, and relatives, offering them $500 to go to Heather's house and break her neck. Amelia was literally following in her own father's footsteps, who had hired a hitman to kill his family because they turned him into the police. It got to the point where Amelia went to Jamie and offered him money to kill his girlfriend. The people she approached with such a wild request thought it was a joke, and naturally, no one agreed. However, the information reached Heather and terrified her. The woman dropped the charges against Joshua. On February 6, 2009, after spending a month behind bars, Fulgham was released, and events took a tragic turn. Upon leaving jail, the man decided he urgently needed to see his children. He went to Heather's house, where he learned she was now dating Jamie, his best friend. Moreover, Jamie was now driving Josh's car. Fulgham was furious that his wife had replaced him so quickly. He yelled, cursed, and then declared he would take custody of their children away from Heather. She responded that he wouldn't see the children at all until he changed his behavior. The craziest part of this mess was that the children were the ones suffering. Heather and Josh had 2 children. Emilia had 3 children from different fathers and was pregnant with a 4th from Josh. Fulgham didn't even hear that all he needed to do was change his behavior. From his wife's words, he concluded that she was going to return to Mississippi and take the children with her so he could never see them again. Josh grew angrier, and Amelia kept pouring fuel on the fire, egging him on that Heather needed to pay dearly. 9 days after Fulgham was released from jail, Heather Strong disappeared. No one had the slightest idea where she could have gone. On February 15, 2009, Heather didn't show up for her shift as a waitress at a cafe at a gas station. She had never missed work before, and such behavior was out of character for her. Even more suspicious was that earlier that day, Strong called her boyfriend Jamie and, through tears, said that Josh was coming to pick up his children. Heather also said she would try to convince Fulgham to leave them alone. Jamie Akeem was used to the constant drama between the former spouses, so he didn't pay much attention to the call. But when he returned home from work that evening, neither Heather nor the children were there. Some of their belongings were also gone. Everything pointed to the woman having gone somewhere. Jamie tried calling Heather, but she didn't answer. Then he called Josh, and Fulgham told him that Heather had come back to him, and they were a family again. He asked Jamie not to bother them anymore. Jamie wasn't even surprised. He had long accepted that Heather and Josh would periodically get back together and break up, so he sadly let it go. 10 days passed since Heather disappeared. Fulgham told everyone that his wife had brought him the children and then left for Mississippi because she needed a break. But that didn't sound like Heather at all. People began to suspect something was wrong. Strong would never have left her children with Josh for such a long time because she didn't trust him. Gradually, the rumors reached Mississippi. Heather's family, where she had supposedly returned, was very surprised. They hadn't heard from her in almost 2 weeks. Then her relatives raised the alarm and reported Heather missing. The police immediately began an investigation. Josh was the first suspect, as the authorities were already aware of domestic violence in the family. The man told them the story that Heather had brought the children and then left for Mississippi to rest and gather her thoughts. Fulgham even showed the officers a document where the woman voluntarily transferred custody of the children to him. There were no grounds to charge Josh, but the police's suspicions didn't go away. On March 18th, just over a month after Strong's disappearance, the police received a report that cash had been withdrawn from Heather's bank card at an ATM. Detectives immediately checked the surveillance footage and discovered that Joshua Fulgham had used the missing woman's card. At that point, it was enough to arrest him. During the interrogation, the officers learned there was another key witness who played a role in Strong's disappearance, Emilia Carr. The woman voluntarily came to the station, expressing a desire to assist the investigation. She was very convincing and played the role of a concerned friend well. Amelia and Josh were questioned simultaneously, but in separate rooms. The officers wanted to get a confession from them. Soon, the police learned that Carr had offered acquaintances $500 to kill her best friend. They also found out that during one argument, the woman had held a knife to Strong's throat and threatened to kill her. After these details, Amelia visibly grew nervous, though she tried to appear calm outwardly and claimed she had no conflicts with anyone. Then the detectives began pitting Josh and Amelia against each other, telling both that one of them had already confessed but was trying to pin the crime on their accomplice. Amelia quickly realized she needed to save herself and declared she would tell the truth if granted immunity from prosecution. Of course, the detectives couldn't agree to this, as the woman was a potential criminal. They decided to press Josh harder, and he broke. The interrogations lasted several days and were exhausting, so Fulgham confessed that he didn't take Heather's life, but was still guilty. On February 15, 2009, the day Heather disappeared, Joshua snapped. He genuinely believed his wife would take his children and prevent him from seeing them. Much of this was due to Amelia, who constantly provoked him, and so the man decided something needed to be done to remove his ex-wife from the picture. First, they needed to lure Heather to Amelia's trailer. According to Josh, they promised her money. Strong brought the children to her husband's house and then somehow ended up at her rival's trailer. Inside, an argument broke out between the spouses, during which an enraged Amelia stormed in and hit Heather on the head with a flashlight. Strong lost consciousness. Seizing the moment, the conspirators sat her in a computer chair, bound her hands and feet with duct tape, and taped her mouth shut so she couldn't make a sound. When the captive came to, Josh showed her a document where she voluntarily transferred custody of the children to him and demanded she sign it. At first, Heather adamantly refused, so the man resorted to threatening her life. If Strong didn't voluntarily give up the children, Josh promised to kill her. He must not have been very convincing because Heather ultimately signed the document herself, and that should have been the end of the story, as Fulgham technically got what he wanted. But then Amelia stepped in and convinced Josh that letting Heather go was dangerous because she would find a way to get revenge. The only way to silence her was to get rid of her once and for all. And Joshua agreed with her. First, Amelia tried to break Heather's neck, relying on her skills as a massage therapist, but she simply didn't have the strength. Then she put a trash bag over her rival's head and wrapped duct tape around her neck to suffocate her. But that didn't work either. Finally, Amelia approached Heather and pinched her nose shut, cutting off her air supply. The victim's mouth was taped shut, so she had no way to breathe. For a while, Strong tried to resist, but soon her body went limp. After that, Josh and Amelia put the woman's body in a suitcase, and then, when no one was around, buried it in the backyard. Later, Fulgham led the detectives to the spot and showed them where his wife, Heather Strong's remains were hidden. Now, the police had Josh's confession, but Amelia still hadn't said anything. The detectives had no evidence proving her involvement in the crime and had no idea how to get the truth out of her. That's when Fulgham's sister, Michelle, stepped in. The woman came to the police station herself and said she could get a confession from Emilia Carr. Michelle didn't want her brother to be convicted for someone else's crime. The investigators arranged a meeting between Michelle and Amelia, equipping Josh's sister with a listening device beforehand. The women were friends, so a walk in the park together wasn't unusual for them. Michelle insisted that Carr tell her the truth, and Amelia, unaware that her friend was wearing a wire, fully corroborated Josh's story, describing how they tried various ways to kill Heather. The woman had no idea the detectives were listening to her entire account. That was essentially all the police needed. Emilia Carr and Joshua Fulgham were charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. While in jail awaiting trial, Amelia gave birth to her fourth child, who was immediately given up for adoption. Her other 3 children, as well as Heather and Josh's 2 children, were placed in foster families. The irresponsible parents, unable to sort out their own lives and relationships, ruined the lives of several young children. 18 months later, in 2010, the case finally went to trial. Emilia Carr was the first to face the jury. She pleaded not guilty. The Carr family issued a statement that due to the abuse she suffered from her father and grandfather as a child, Amelia was traumatized. which could have affected her mental state. Her lawyer tried to portray the defendant as a victim under Joshua's strict control and influence, but the prosecution only needed to present the recording of her confession, and the young woman's false nature was immediately exposed. The jury found Emilia Carr guilty of first-degree murder. Next, they had to decide what punishment the defendant should face. The grand jury voted 7-5 to sentence Amelia to death. At the age of 24, Carr was placed on death row and became the youngest woman to receive such a severe verdict. She was officially sentenced to death by lethal injection on February 22, 2011. A year later, in April 2012, Josh's trial took place. He also pleaded not guilty. However, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the same crime, as the jury's opinions were divided. 8 voted for life imprisonment, while 4 voted against. The judge followed their recommendation. Although both defendants were guilty of kidnapping and Heather Strong's death, it was Amelia who took away her ability to breathe. Perhaps this fact played a key role in the sentencing. While in prison, Amelia launched a campaign to prove her innocence. She gave several interviews in which she again tried to portray herself as a victim of circumstances. The title of "The Youngest Woman on Death Row" was one Carr held for a long time. However, in 2017, after numerous appeals, her death sentence was commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, as the jury's initial vote was not unanimous. Often, in crimes, more attention is focused on women, but in this case, both perpetrators were guilty. The difference was that Josh genuinely repented and took responsibility for what he did. He deeply regretted taking the life of the mother of his children and the woman he once loved. But Emilia Carr continued to deny everything and blamed Josh. She never showed remorse, yet both were equally responsible. Fulgham was the force, and Carr was the one who directed that force as she pleased. Heather Strong was a kind, caring, and loving young woman. She had 2 children whom she loved more than anything in the world. Heather worked hard to provide them with everything they needed and wanted nothing more than to watch them grow. The worst part is that it wasn't just Heather who suffered. Her children lost both parents at once. Strong was only 26 years old, and her murder was utterly senseless. Heather's main problem was that she chose the wrong man. As the saying goes, love is blind. If you have finished watching, you are a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications, and put the like. See you in the next video.